The Innovators, by Walter Isaacson. Introduction. Have you ever wondered where the world you live in really came from? Not the world of mountains and rivers, but the world of screens and clicks, of instant messages and endless information. The digital world. We often think of great inventions as flashes of brilliance, lightning bolts that strike a lone genius working in a dusty garage. A single name we can put on a pedestal: an Edison, a Bell, a Morse. But what if that's not the whole story? What if the most important inventions of our time, the computer, the internet, the very air we breathe digitally, weren't born in a flash, but were woven together, thread, by teams of remarkable people? Walter Isaacson, the celebrated author who gave us the definitive biographies of giants like Steve Jobs and Albert Einstein, turns his attention in The Innovators to a different kind of story. It's not about a single genius, but a group of them. Hackers, dreamers, geeks, and even a few poets who, together, created the digital revolution. This book has sold millions of copies and has been hailed as a masterpiece because it reveals a secret about creativity that is often overlooked. It's the story of how innovation truly happens. It's a story about collaboration, partnership, and the magic that ignites when different minds, with different talents, come together. Today, we're going to journey through this incredible story. By the end of our time together, you won't just know who invented the computer or the internet. You will understand the fundamental DNA of innovation itself. You'll see that the greatest breakthroughs aren't about a single person having an idea, but about how ideas are shared, built upon, and passed from one generation to the next. This isn't just a history lesson, it's a blueprint for creativity. And it all begins, surprisingly, not in a garage in Silicon Valley, but in the heart of Victorian England, with the rebellious daughter of a famous poet. Book summary. Our story starts with a young woman who lived a life of beautiful contradictions. Her name was Ada, Countess of Lovelace. Her father was the famous, and famously wild, poet Lord Byron. He was a man of passion, romance, and chaos. Her mother, terrified that Ada would inherit her father's poetic madness, prescribed a strange antidote, a rigorous education in mathematics. But instead of extinguishing the poetry within her, the logic of math fused with it. Ada developed a love for what she called poetical science. She saw the beauty in equations, the romance in machinery. And in 1843, a full century before the first electronic computer would be built, she looked at the plans for a mechanical calculating machine designed by her friend, the brilliant inventor Charles Babbage, and she saw the future. Babbage's machine, which he called the analytical engine, was designed to crunch numbers. But Ada saw something more. She realized that a machine that could manipulate numbers could also manipulate anything that could be represented by symbols, words, music, images. The analytical engine, she wrote in her famous notes, weaves algebraical patterns just as the Jacquard loom weaves flowers and leaves. She envisioned a general-purpose machine that could be programmed to do almost anything. In that moment, she conceived of the modern computer. But Ada also made a crucial distinction. She argued that while a machine could follow any order we give it, it could never truly think. It could not originate ideas on its own. The analytical engine, she wrote, has no pretensions whatever to originate anything. This idea, which would later be called Lady Lovelace's objection, frames the central drama of the digital age, the dance between human creativity and machine processing. Ada Lovelace and Charles Babbage were a powerful team, a visionary and an engineer. But their time was not yet ripe. The technology to build their dream didn't exist. Babbage would die in poverty, his great engine unbuilt. And Ada, after a life of illness and struggle, would pass away at the same young age as her famous father. But their idea, the idea of a programmable, general-purpose computer, didn't die with them. it simply went to sleep for 100 years. When it finally awoke, it was in the midst of another great global conflict, World War II. And this time, it wasn't a lone pair of dreamers, but vast, coordinated teams funded by governments. The digital age was about to begin, not with a whisper, but with the roar of war. The man who orchestrated this new era of innovation was an MIT professor named Vannevar Bush. He was a brilliant engineer who had built a massive analog computer called the differential analyzer, but his greatest invention was a system. He believed that the future of progress depended on a partnership between three crucial groups: the government, private industry, and academic universities. During the war, he convinced President Roosevelt to create a system where the government funded ambitious research projects, which were then carried out by the brightest minds at universities and companies. This military-industrial academic complex was the engine that would build the atomic bomb, radar, and crucially for our story, the first electronic computers. On one side of the Atlantic, at a secret British estate called Bletchley Park, a team of eccentric geniuses was gathered to break Germany's secret codes. Among them was a man who would become one of the most tragic and brilliant figures of the 20th century, Alan Turing. Turing was a quiet, lonely mathematician who, even before the war, had imagined a theoretical machine, a universal computer, that could perform any logical task you could describe. It was the mathematical fulfillment of Ada Lovelace's vision. At Bletchley Park, Turing and his team put theory into practice, building a machine called Colossus, the first all-electronic, partially programmable computer, to crack the German codes and help win the war. Meanwhile, back in the United States, a similar effort was underway at the University of Pennsylvania. Two men, John Mauchly, a visionary physicist, and Presper Eckert, a brilliant young engineer, were leading a team to build a machine for the U.S. Army. Their goal was to calculate artillery firing tables, a tedious and time-consuming task. The machine they created was called ENIAC, the Electronic Numerical Integrator and Computer. It was a monster, filling a massive room, weighing 30 tons, and containing nearly 18,000 vacuum tubes. But it was a true marvel. It was the first general-purpose, all-electronic computer. The story of who invented the computer is messy. There was Konrad Zuse in Germany, working in his parents' apartment. There was John Atanasoff, toiling in a basement in Iowa. But what made the ENIAC team different was that they were part of the collaborative system Vannevar Bush had envisioned. They had the funding, the engineering support, and a team of brilliant collaborators. And among that team was a group whose contributions were almost lost to history: 6 young women mathematicians who were hired to be the first programmers of ENIAC. People like Jean Jennings Bartik and Betty Snyder Holberton were given the wiring diagrams and told to figure out how to make the machine work. At the time, programming was seen as a secondary task, almost like secretarial work. The men were building the hardware, the important stuff. But these women quickly discovered that software was where the true magic lay. They were the ones who breathed life into the machine, transforming it from a static collection of circuits into a dynamic, problem-solving tool. They were the spiritual heirs of Ada Lovelace. One of the most important of these early programmers was a spirited naval officer with a PhD in math from Yale named Grace Hopper. She was assigned to work on another early computer, the Harvard Mark I, built by the stern and demanding Howard Aiken. Hopper, like the women of ENIAC, realized that the future of computing wasn't just about building faster machines, it was about making them easier to program. She pioneered the idea of a compiler, a program that could translate human-like instructions into the ones and zeros that the machine understood. This was a revolutionary step. It meant that you didn't have to be a hardware genius to tell a computer what to do. Programming was becoming its own art form. But these early computers, as miraculous as they were, had a fatal flaw. They were built with vacuum tubes. Thousands of them. They were big, they were expensive, they generated enormous heat, and they were constantly burning out. For the digital revolution to truly ignite, it needed a new kind of spark. That spark came not from a government-funded project, but from a corporate research lab that embodied Vannevar Bush's vision of collaboration, Bell Labs in New Jersey. In the years after the war, Bell Labs was a cathedral of innovation. It was a place where theoretical physicists, materials scientists, and hands-on engineers walked the same long hallways, bumping into each other, sharing ideas, and creating serendipitous magic. At the center of this world were three men on a mission to replace the vacuum tube. William Shockley was the brilliant, ambitious, and deeply troubled theorist. John Bardeen was the quiet, contemplative genius of quantum physics. And Walter Brattain was the masterful, hands-on experimentalist. Together, they were a perfect, if combustible, team. Their goal was to create a solid-state amplifier, a way to control the flow of electricity through a solid material, rather than through a vacuum in a glass tube. After years of frustrating failures, in December of 1947, Bardeen and Brattain, working side by side at a lab bench, finally had a breakthrough. Using a sliver of germanium, some gold foil, and a bent paper clip, they created a device that worked. It was small, it was efficient, and it didn't burn out. They called it the transistor. The transistor was the invention that truly launched the digital age. It was the building block for everything to come. But the story of its invention is also a cautionary tale. William Shockley, consumed by his ego and furious that he hadn't been directly involved in the final breakthrough, went off on his own and invented an even better, more manufacturable version of the transistor just a few weeks later. His brilliance was matched only by his difficult personality. He drove his partners away and eventually left Bell Labs to start his own company in California, in a place that was still known for its apricot orchards. He called his company Shockley Semiconductor. He was a Nobel Prize winner, a genius, and he managed to recruit a team of the brightest young minds in the country. But he was a terrible manager. Paranoid, autocratic, and impossible to work with, he drove his best people away. In 1957, 8 of his most brilliant young engineers, including a charismatic Iowa-born physicist named Robert Noyce and a quiet, thoughtful chemist named Gordon Moore, rebelled. They left Shockley to start their own company. Shockley called them the Traitorous Eight. History would call them the founders of Silicon Valley. Their new company was Fairchild Semiconductor. And there, they would perfect the next great leap in the digital revolution. The transistor solved the problem of the vacuum tube, but it created a new one, the tyranny of numbers. As electronic circuits became more complex, they required hundreds, even thousands of transistors, all of which had to be wired together by hand. It was a painstaking, expensive, and unreliable process. The solution came to 2 men, working independently, almost at the same time. At Texas Instruments, a quiet, gentle engineer named Jack Kilby figured out that you could make all the components of a circuit, the transistors, the resistors, the capacitors, out of a single piece of semiconductor material. He built a clunky but working prototype. He had invented the integrated circuit. A few months later, at Fairchild, Robert Noyce had a similar, but more elegant, idea. Building on the work of a colleague, he figured out a way not only to put all the components on a single chip of silicon, but also to connect them with a thin layer of metal printed on top. No more tiny wires. Noyce's method was the key to mass production. The microchip was born. The microchip changed everything. It meant that the power of a room-sized ENIAC could now fit on something smaller than a fingernail. And thanks to a prediction made by Noyce's partner, Gordon Moore, the future of the microchip became predictable. In 1965, Moore observed that the number of transistors that could be crammed onto a chip was doubling roughly every year. This became known as Moore's law. It wasn't a law of nature, it was a self-fulfilling prophecy for the industry, a relentless drumbeat of progress that drove the digital age forward at an exponential pace. With the invention of the microchip, all the pieces were in place for the personal computer. But who would build it? The big companies like IBM and DEC saw no reason why anyone would want a computer of their own. The future, they believed, was in big, powerful mainframes that people could share. But out in California, a different idea was taking root, fertilized by a strange and potent mix of cultures. You had the engineers from the defense industry, the hackers from the universities, and a new wave of hippies and counterculture rebels who saw technology not as a tool of control, but as a tool for liberation. At the center of this swirl was a lanky, charismatic figure named Stuart Brand. He had been a member of Ken Kesey's Merry Pranksters, the psychedelic pioneers who drove across the country in a Dayglow bus. And in 1968, Brand started a publication that became the Bible of the counterculture, the Whole Earth Catalog. Its motto was access to tools. It was a guide for people who wanted to build their own lives, their own communities, and their own futures. It featured everything from buckskin jackets to geodesic domes to, yes, early electronic calculators. It taught a generation that technology could be personal, empowering, and even a little bit rebellious. This was the spirit that animated another visionary, a quiet, intense engineer named Douglas Engelbart. In 1968, at what became known as the mother of all demos, Engelbart unveiled a system that was breathtakingly ahead of its time. He sat on a stage and, for 90 minutes, demonstrated a computer with a graphical display, multiple windows, hypertext links, and a strange little pointing device that he and his team had invented called a mouse. Engelbart's vision was not of artificial intelligence, but of augmented intelligence. He wanted to create machines that would be partners with humans, tools that would amplify our own creativity and intellect. Engelbart's demo was like a vision of a promised land. But it was at another corporate research lab, Xerox PARC, where a team of young rebels, many of them recruited from Engelbart's own lab, would actually build that promised land. Led by the brilliant and theatrical Alan Kay, the researchers at PARC created the Alto, the first true personal computer. It had a graphical user interface, a mouse, and an Ethernet connection to link it to other computers. It was, in almost every respect, the blueprint for the modern personal computer. But Xerox, a company built on selling copiers, didn't know what to do with it. They had invented the future, but they couldn't see it. The personal computer revolution, when it finally exploded, would not come from a giant corporation. It would come from the hobbyists, the dreamers, and the kids in the garage. In January of 1975, a magazine called Popular Electronics featured on its cover a build-it-yourself computer kit called the Altair 8800. It wasn't much, just a box with some switches and blinking lights, but for the first time, a computer was affordable enough for an ordinary person to own. The Altair ignited a firestorm of excitement. And at the center of that firestorm was a new group in California called the Homebrew Computer Club. It was a chaotic, collaborative gathering of geeks, hobbyists, and dreamers who met in a garage in Menlo Park to show off their latest creations and share ideas. The ethos of the club was pure hacker culture. Information wanted to be free. If you built something cool, you shared the designs. One of the regulars at the Homebrew Club was a shy, brilliant young engineer from Hewlett-Packard named Steve Wozniak. He was a hardware genius, a prankster who could design elegant circuits with a startling economy of chips. Inspired by the Altair, he set out to build a computer of his own. But his would be better. It would have a keyboard and could be hooked up to a TV screen. In the summer of 1975, he brought his creation to a homebrew meeting and, in the spirit of the club, handed out the schematics for free. Wozniak was a brilliant engineer, but he wasn't an entrepreneur. That's where his best friend came in. A younger, more intense, and far more ambitious kid from the neighborhood named Steve Jobs. Jobs looked at Wozniak's creation and saw not just a cool hobbyist project, but a product. A real product that could be packaged, polished, and sold. "Let's sell it," Jobs said. And with that, Apple Computer was born in a garage. While Wozniak was the hardware wizard, Jobs was the visionary. He understood that for the personal computer to change the world, it had to be more than just a tool for hobbyists. It had to be an appliance. It had to be simple, elegant, and friendly. Their first creation, the Apple I, was still a kit for hobbyists. But their next one, the Apple II, was a fully assembled, beautifully designed machine that was ready to use right out of the box. It was the computer that launched the personal computer industry. But the Apple II had a secret weapon, a piece of software that transformed it from a toy into a serious tool. It was the first spreadsheet program, called VisiCalc. It was created by two recent business school students, Dan Bricklin and Bob Frankston, and it was what businesses call a killer app, an application so valuable that it makes people go out and buy the hardware just to run it. Suddenly, the personal computer had a purpose. At the same time that Jobs and Wozniak were building a company around integrated hardware and software, another partnership was brewing that would take a very different approach. Back in that Harvard dorm room, when Paul Allen showed Bill Gates the popular electronics magazine, they didn't see an opportunity in hardware. They saw an opportunity in software. They realized that every one of these new personal computers would need a programming language. So, in a frantic 8-week coding session, they created a version of the language BASIC for the Altair. But Gates, even at 19, was a brilliant business strategist. He didn't sell the software to the maker of the Altair. He licensed it. And he made sure he retained the rights to license it to other computer makers as well. With that single decision, Gates and Allen founded Microsoft and established the business model that would make them billionaires. Their bet was that software, not hardware, would be the most valuable part of the personal computer industry. This set up the great rivalry of the digital age. Apple, under Steve Jobs, pursued an integrated model. They built the hardware and the software together, creating a seamless, beautiful, but closed system. Microsoft, under Bill Gates, pursued a licensed model. They created the software, the operating system, and licensed it to anyone who wanted to build a computer. When IBM, the giant of the computer industry, decided to enter the personal computer market in 11,980, they came to Bill Gates for an operating system. Gates, in a move of breathtaking audacity, bought a quick and dirty operating system from a small Seattle company for $50,000, polished it up, and licensed it to IBM. But, crucially, he kept the rights to license that same operating system, now called MS-DOS, to all of the other companies that would soon be making clones of the IBM PC. The stage was set. The personal computer revolution had two competing models. And for a moment, it seemed like Apple had the upper hand. While Microsoft's DOS was a clunky command line system, Steve Jobs and his team at Apple were working on something revolutionary, something they had first seen at Xerox PARC, the graphical user interface. The Macintosh, launched in 1984, was a revelation. With its mouse, its icons, its windows, and its beautiful design, it was a computer for the rest of us. It was a machine that you didn't have to be a geek to love. But Bill Gates was not one to be left behind. Microsoft embarked on its own project to create a graphical user interface. It was called Windows. The first version was clumsy and crude compared to the Mac, but Gates was relentless. And because Microsoft's operating system could run on cheap computers from hundreds of different manufacturers, Windows eventually won the market share war. Software, as Gates had predicted, had become king. But there was a third path, a path that rejected both the closed system of Apple and the proprietary model of Microsoft. It was the path of free and open source software, a continuation of the old hacker ethic of the homebrew club. At its heart was a brilliant, eccentric, and fiercely idealistic programmer from the MIT AI lab named Richard Stallman. Stallman believed that software should not be owned. It should be free, free as in speech, not free as in beer. He started a project called GNU to create a completely free operating system. He and his followers wrote many of the components, but they were missing a key piece, the kernel, the core of the operating system. In 1991, that piece came from an unlikely source, a quiet 21-year-old student in Helsinki, Finland, named Linus Torvalds. Working on his own, just for fun, he created a kernel that he called Linux. And in the spirit of the hacker community, he released it to the world for free. The combination of GNU and Linux created a powerful, free, open-source operating system that would become the backbone of millions of web servers and devices around the world. So by the early 1990s, the personal computer had conquered the world. But it was still a world of isolated islands. The other great creation of the digital age, the Internet, had also been growing, but on a separate track. The Internet had started as the ARPANET, a government-funded project to link researchers at universities and defense contractors. Its creation was another story of brilliant collaboration, led by visionaries like J.C.R. Licklider and engineers like Bob Taylor and Larry Roberts. They developed a new way of sending information called packet switching, which broke data into tiny packets that could be routed independently through a decentralized network. It was a system designed to be resilient, with no central point of control. For years, the Internet was a closed community, a private playground for academics and researchers. But as personal computers spread and modems became common, people wanted to connect. They started dialing into online services like CompuServe and The Source, which were like private, walled gardens of information and community. One of the most successful of these was America Online, or AOL, started by a young, patient, and quietly determined entrepreneur named Steve Case. AOL's genius was its simplicity. With its friendly "You've got mail" greeting, it made going online easy and fun for millions of people. But the real revolution came when these walled gardens opened up to the wild, chaotic, and open world of the Internet. And the tool that made that possible, the invention that turned the Internet from an obscure tool for researchers into a global phenomenon for everyone, was the World Wide Web. The web was the creation of a quiet, brilliant British physicist working at the CERN particle physics lab in Switzerland named Tim Berners-Lee. In 1991, he invented a system of hypertext links that allowed any document to be connected to any other document, anywhere on the Internet. He created the language for it, HTML, the protocol for transferring it, HTTP, and the first browser to view it. And then, in an act of incredible generosity, he gave it to the world for free, with no patents and no royalties. Berners-Lee's web was a powerful idea, but his browser was text-only and hard to use. The web exploded into popular consciousness with the creation of a browser that made it graphical and fun, Mosaic. It was built by a brash, brilliant undergraduate at the University of Illinois named Mark Andreessen. Mosaic, and its successor, Netscape, made surfing the web a visual, intuitive experience. Suddenly, anyone could be a publisher. And they were. The first wave of the web was dominated by personal homepages and weblogs, or blogs. People like Justin Hall, a student at Swarthmore, started posting their thoughts, their links, and the intimate details of their lives online. Then, entrepreneurs like Ev Williams, with his company Blogger, created tools that made it push-button simple for anyone to have their own blog. The web became a vast, collaborative space. And two final inventions harnessed that collaborative power to organize the world's information. The first was the wiki, a piece of software created by Ward Cunningham that allowed anyone to edit a web page. In 2001, an entrepreneur named Jimmy Wales used that software to launch a crazy idea, a free, online encyclopedia that anyone could contribute to. It was called Wikipedia. It was a bazaar, not a cathedral, built by the wisdom of the crowd. And it worked. It became the greatest collaborative knowledge project in human history. The second invention was a new kind of search engine. With millions of web pages blooming every day, finding anything was becoming impossible. Two graduate students at Stanford, Larry Page and Sergey Brin, came up with a brilliant idea. The importance of a web page, they reasoned, could be determined by how many other pages linked to it. It was a way of using the collective judgment of the entire web to rank search results. They called their project Google. It was another form of human-computer symbiosis, a machine that harnessed the wisdom of the crowd. And with that, the digital world as we know it, personal, networked, and searchable, was finally complete. The stage was set for the next chapter of our story, one that you are living in right now. Commentary. As we look back on this incredible journey, from Ada Lovelace's poetic dreams to the global network that connects us all, a few powerful lessons emerge. And these aren't just lessons about technology, they're lessons about how human creativity works, and how we can all be a part of it. The first and most important lesson is that innovation is a team sport. The myth of the lone inventor, the solitary genius struck by a bolt of lightning, is just that, a myth. The digital age was built by partnerships: Babbage and Lovelace, Eckert and Mauchly, Bardeen and Bratton, Noyce and Moore, Jobs and Wozniak, Gates and Allen, Page and Brin. It was built by teams at Bell Labs and Xerox PARC, by the collaborative communities of the Homebrew Club and the early Internet engineers. True genius lies not in having all the answers, but in knowing how to collaborate with those who have different pieces of the puzzle. The visionary needs the engineer. The hardware geek needs the software guru. The dreamer needs the doer. So, the first step to being an innovator is to find your team. Look for people who have skills you don't, who see the world in a way you don't. That friction, that creative abrasion, is where the sparks of genius fly. The second lesson, one that echoes from Ada Lovelace to Steve Jobs, is that the most profound innovations happen at the intersection of the arts and the sciences. Ada saw poetical science. Steve Jobs, at the end of every product launch, would show a slide of a street sign marking the intersection of technology and liberal arts. He believed that technology alone wasn't enough. It had to be married with the humanities to create products that make our hearts sing. This is a powerful reminder for all of us. If you're a student of science and math, don't be afraid to fall in love with poetry or painting. If you're a student of the humanities, don't be shy about learning to code or understanding how a circuit works. The future will be built by those who can stand at that intersection, who can appreciate the beauty of an equation and the elegance of an algorithm. Finally, the story of the innovators shows us a constant, healthy tension between two powerful forces: the open, collaborative spirit of sharing, and the proprietary, commercial drive to build a business. The hackers at the Homebrew Club wanted to give everything away for free. Bill Gates wrote them an angry letter telling them they were thieves. But the truth is, we need both. The open sharing ethos of academics and hackers gave us the internet and the web. The commercial drive of entrepreneurs gave us the personal computer, the user-friendly software, and the companies that could scale these inventions to change the world. The lesson is not to choose one path, but to understand that progress comes from the dynamic interplay between them. So, what can you do with all of this? First, as I said, find your team. The next great invention won't come from a single mind. It will come from a partnership, a collaboration, a community. Second, cultivate your poetical science. Read widely. Learn about things that have nothing to do with your chosen field. The most valuable insights come from connecting disparate ideas. And third, decide what your contribution will be. Will you be a builder of open platforms, or the creator of a polished product? Both paths are noble, and both are necessary. The story of the innovators isn't just about the past. It's a living story, and the next chapter is yet to be written. It will be written by people like you, who are curious, who are passionate, and who understand that the greatest creations are not the work of a single person, but the symphony of many. That was the story of the Innovators by Walter Isaacson. We've touched on the major milestones and the brilliant minds that shaped our digital world, but I'll be honest with you, a summary can only give you a glimpse. The real magic of this book is in the details, the human stories, the way Isaacson masterfully connects the dots across a century of progress. If any part of this journey has sparked your curiosity, I truly encourage you to pick up a copy. Reading it isn't just about learning facts, it's about understanding the very nature of creativity and collaboration. It's an experience that can genuinely change how you see the world and your own potential to contribute to it. A link to the book is in the description below. Also, if you found this summary valuable, I'd be so grateful if you'd hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. It lets me know that these deep dives are helpful, and it ensures you won't miss our next journey into another life-changing book from the world's most successful minds. Let's keep learning and growing together.